Howdy folks, hope you're all enjoying your weekend, and in a break from the traditional weekend non-wargaming video, today we're going to be plumbing the depths. See what I did there? Dad jokes or best jokes. Plumbing the depths of the World of Warships submarine test server. Yesterday I spent many a happy hour shooting at and getting shot at by submarines. I did have a lot of fun. There were certain things that I absolutely loved. There were other things that frustrated the shit out of me. But at this early stage, it's really too early to say whether or not the frustrations I experienced were as a result of my just not really knowing what the hell I was supposed to be doing, or down to some issues with the game design that need to be tweaked and polished. It could be one, it could be the other. I think it's more likely to be a combination of both. But we'll explore what I liked and what I didn't like, and why I liked it and why I didn't like it, as we get further on into the video. So for now, strap yourselves in, grab yourself a ration of grog, and rig the boat for crashed item. We're going in. Now, if like me, you logged into the test server and thought, where the hell are my submarines? Go to the containers. There will be one waiting for you. One of two, both tier 6, either the USS Cachalot, which was one of the American V-boat class of submarines, or the German U-69, the first of the German Type 7C U-boats, the workhorses of the German submarine fleet. Now, you will get the opportunity to unlock both, but at the beginning you only get one. In order to unlock the other one, also in a container, you have to complete a combat mission, earning 8,000 base experience in carriers, battleships, or cruisers. The reason for this is that they don't just want everybody to be playing submarines and destroyers. You're under no compulsion to complete this combat mission if you're entirely happy with the one submarine that you've got, and to be honest at this stage there isn't really that much of a difference between the two. Or you just want to plug around in destroyers, launching depth charges at submarines, then go ahead and do that. The matchmaker on the test server is populating both teams with an even spread of bots to cover gaps in the classes not provided by the players, so basically do whatever the hell you want. Now, before we go any further, it's only fair to let you know that, well, aside from everything that you see being work in progress and subject to change, which should be fairly obvious at this early stage, but also you're going to be seeing video recorded from two different perspectives, either live on the test server or video recorded from replay files of games played on the test server. And the reason I'm pointing this out is that the replay files, particularly if you're in a submarine, the replay files don't capture all of the UI elements, but I'll show you some live gameplay recording first and point out the sort of things that I'm talking about from the submarine player's perspective, so that if later on in today's video we see a segment that was recorded from a replay file and those UI elements are missing, you'll already know what to expect to look for. So, I think that's me fully disclaimered up. Let's crack on. Let's find some skimmers to sink. Now, those of you who played submarines in the Halloween event last year will find certain things very familiar and certain things very, very different. And in particular, what I'm talking about here are your depth controls. Now, moving the submarine around is the same as any surface ship. W and S controls your speed, and A and D controls your rudder. But you also have a depth control in the submarine. And it's not like during the Halloween event, where there were 4 different depths that you could set. You were either surfaced, you were at periscope depth, you were dived, or you were dived deep. Instead, what you have here is a relatively simple, I suppose, hydroplane control. And those are controlled by the F and C keys. You press F if you want to go up, and you press C if you want to go down. Now, you might think that sounds fairly similar to how submarines were controlled during last year's Halloween event, but it is not. There are no set depths that you can dive or climb to, and in particular, you don't come to periscope depth by using the hydroplanes, the F and C keys. And that's important, because the only way you can conduct an attack is by bringing the boat to periscope depth. You come to periscope depth by pressing the G key. It actually has its own icon there, right next to damage control, but at the time I was recording this, I had no idea what it was for. I thought it was for the sonar ping. More on that later. Suffice to say that after a couple of minutes of not actually attacking anything in my first submarine game, I did eventually figure it out. When you submerge like this, you're completely invisible to anybody who isn't inside the 2 kilometer proximity detection range. I've pressed the G key. The submarine is going to climb to periscope depth, which will allow me to actually use my 2 forward torpedo tubes. My base surface detection range is 5 kilometers, but it's only 2.5 kilometers when you're at periscope depth. However, I am much, much slower at this depth. Okay, I fired 2 torpedoes in exactly the same way that anything else armed with torpedoes launches them at a target that you're locked onto, but now I get the opportunity to turn those torpedoes into acoustic homing torpedoes by attempting to hit one of the 2 target points on that ship over there with a sonar ping. You get a ribbon to notify you that you've made a successful ping, and you'll notice that the torpedoes had acquired a couple of little flashing red dots on them to also indicate that they were acoustic homing, and yeah, that seemed to work just fine. Now, you need to take this whole acoustic homing torpedo thing with a little bit of a grain of salt. Yes, the torpedoes do guide themselves, but we're not talking Mark 48 ad caps here. If you miss the target, they're not going to swing around, pull a U-turn, and then slam into the target from the other side. Yes, they do home in on the target, but they're steered very, very gently. You can still dodge them if you know they're coming, and you pull relevant evasive maneuvers. What they're trying to do here is basically introduce an element of skill into lining up a torpedo shot, in the same way that somebody who knows how to aim with his armor-piercing shells is able to score a citadel hit on a surface ship with his guns. A submarine captain who lines up a nicely aimed shot with his torpedoes and manages to ping both of the target indicators with his sonar emitter is going to be rewarded with a much better chance of his torpedoes actually hitting anything worth hitting. Here's another example of my trying and mostly failing to get a torpedo lock on a Fubuki who's getting dangerously close. I'm at periscope depth and he's going to see me when he gets within 2.5 kilometers. He's also going to be notified by a ping on the minimap announcing my position every time I try to light him up with a sonar ping, and I finally get him on the 3rd ping, at which point he's already seen me, he's already preparing to torpedo me, and he's shooting at me, so it's time for me to dive. It's very easy to avoid torpedoes in a submarine. Just don't be on the surface and don't be at periscope depth. And even deep water torpedoes, which the Fubuki obviously isn't firing, but even deep water torpedoes will not hit you. Note that now that I've submerged, the only enemy ship visible to me on the minimap is the Fubuki, and only that because he's within 2 kilometers proximity detection range. Did manage to sink him, however. Submerged submarines cannot scout for shit. You can't see them, they can't see you either, which can make life very short and interesting for you if you decide to surface, or perhaps you run out of oxygen and are forced to surface, and find yourself sitting within 5 kilometers of a whole bunch of enemy ships. Your oxygen, by the way, is a very precious resource. It does not last forever. You cannot stay submerged forever, and you don't really want to be burning through it unless you absolutely definitely have to. So I'm going to come up to periscope depth and just have a quick look around. And okay, nothing within 5 kilometers, although both the Gepard and the Bayern are close to 5 kilometers, so I don't want to surface for 2 reasons. I'd get spotted, which is a very good reason to not surface, but also I can't attack them if I'm on the surface. I need to stay at periscope depth, and I am still burning through oxygen while I'm at periscope depth, but not quite as quickly as I was when I was fully submerged. And in case you needed any further confirmation that this is in fact the very first game I played in Submarines on the test server, I'm sitting here backing away from the Gepard, waiting out the remaining 19 seconds before my starboard torpedo tubes reload, when in fact my port torpedo tubes are completely loaded. I've just figured it out. Switch to the port tubes, 2 torpedoes in the water. Let's try to hit this guy with a sonar ping. Got it. Right, that's good enough for government work. Let's get the hell out of here. And when you see what happens to a submarine when it gets attacked by a destroyer, you'll understand why I'm very anxious to get the hell away from that Gepard. I managed to land 1 torpedo on him, but it clearly wasn't enough. And I'm running very, very low on oxygen. I'm going to have to surface. Oh, wait, no. Yes, fantastic. Okay. So now I can surface, hopefully without any fear of being detected. Although the Bayern was around about 5 kilometers away as well, so we'll just... what's the worst that can happen? Let's take a look. Yep, I'm detected by aircraft. And the Bayern is very close as well, so down to periscope depth, and now you're going to see something very important, because you might have been thinking, well, I'm not that impressed with the amount of damage that you've been doing with the torpedo hits that have landed. Well, that's because up until now I've never managed to get a double sonar ping lock on a target. But I've got 2 torpedoes in the water against the buy-in. I've successfully pinged the first target point, wait the 3-second cooldown, ping the second target point, and now watch the torpedo icons. Do you see the difference? Those are now extremely dangerous torpedoes capable of scoring citadels. And in fact only one of them is going to hit. But it did about as much damage in that single double lock hit that any 3 of my torpedo hits have done up until now, either unguided or with just a single lock on. And the reason for this, as I said earlier, is because they're trying to introduce an element of skill into taking your torpedo shots, in the same way that if you know how to shoot accurately with surface guns and armor-piercing shells, you can score big damage by getting citadels on your targets. Of course, as luck would have it, I'll try to do it again and repeat my success, but I'll screw it up and I'm taking far too much fire. So I'm forced to dive, but the mostly unguided torpedo manages to get the kill anyway. However, I don't have the oxygen for this. I'm going to be forced to do an emergency blow, which is what happens if you are submerged and you run out of oxygen. You must surface. You get no choice in the matter. The boat goes up, whether you want it to or not, whether you're surrounded by enemies or not, whether it's going to mean your instant destruction or not. If you've got no oxygen, you are going to surface. Like it or lump it, it's the way things are going to be. And oh, well, that was a spot of luck. Turns out the buy-in was the only thing close enough to spot me. Note how slowly your oxygen replenishes. It's not like you can just pop up for a minute and fully top off your oxygen tanks and then, you know, hide for the rest of the match. It doesn't work like that. Or at least it doesn't work like that at the moment. And I don't expect it to work like that, regardless of anything else that changes between now and whenever they decide, yep, submarines are done, let's stick a fork in them. Now, do you remember how easily I was able to avoid torpedoes when the Fubuki attacked me earlier? All you have to do is just dive. Just don't be on the surface, don't be at periscope depth, and you're basically immune to being torpedoed in a submarine. Even deep water torpedoes can only hit you if you are at the very least at periscope depth. However, that does not mean that if the submarine is submerged, it's completely immune to damage. And I'm not just talking about being attacked and depth charged by destroyers, because the submarine is a physical object in the game, and there are other physical objects in the game lurking beneath the waves. Other submarines. Other submarines cannot torpedo you, however. Remember, submarines can only conduct attacks when they're at periscope depth. But that doesn't mean they can't ram each other. Totally worth it. And yes, you can also ram a submarine if you're in a surface ship and you catch one on the surface or at periscope depth. Although at the moment I think surface ships are taking way too much damage when they successfully pull off a ram against a submarine. It should always be fatal for the submarine and should cause damage to the surface ship, but it shouldn't necessarily write them off. In fact, I've seen examples where destroyers have rammed submarines and the submarine survived and the destroyer sank, so yeah, something that needs to be looked at there. Anyway, speaking of destroyers, let's take a look at some anti-submarine warfare. Meanwhile, I just rounded the corner of this island, spotted an enemy submarine who immediately shit his pants and crash dived. However, since I'm in a destroyer, I get that position indicator over there to tell me where to start hunting for him. And, well, since I'm now inside proximity detection range, I don't need it anymore. I can see exactly where he is. And because all destroyers come equipped with depth charges, even if you can't physically see the depth charge models on the ship itself, all I have to do is get close enough. The boys will automatically start dumping charges over the side. He's forced to dive in order to avoid the ram. He couldn't torpedo me. The depth charges start pounding away and he is dead. Simple as that. A little bit too simple if you ask me. I mean, the last thing I'm asking for is for them to make destroyer gameplay even more complicated. The fact that it's taken care of automatically, I'm okay with. I just think it's a little bit too easy, and destroyers do a little bit too much damage to submarines using this automatic method. Maybe just tone the damage down a little. But at the same time, there are other things that I feel they definitely need to look at, because we don't want it all going the way of the submarines after all. And to give you an example of the sort of thing that I'm talking about, I'm going to jump into a cruiser. Here I am in the somewhat fragile but otherwise excellent German Tier 6 cruiser, the Nürnberg, and I've had a pretty good game so far. I've scored 3 kills, and not all of them were against the bots. But there is an enemy submarine located on the other side of the island. Just over there, we spotted him a moment ago. He's just managed to torpedo and sink the friendly Fuso, and yep, there he is, spotted by dive bombers. Nothing I can do about it at the moment. I'm concentrating on getting out of line of fire of that Fuso back there. I am, of course, spotted and targeted, but at the moment there isn't actually anything that has a clear line of fire on me. Now, what this is going to serve to illustrate is a concern that I'm sure many of you have when you heard the news, as did I, that the primary counter to submarines is going to be destroyers conducting depth charge attacks. Because what the hell are battleships and cruisers supposed to do? What happens if there isn't a destroyer nearby? Or what happens if it's late game? Or, you know, judging by a lot of random battles players 2 minutes into the match and all of your destroyers have been sunk? What's an honest, hard-working cruiser captain supposed to do to deal with the submarine threat? Well, you've got guns. If they've been detected, shoot at them. Seems logical. The only problem is that in practice it's not quite as simple as that. And I'm about to show you why. At the moment that guy's been forced to surface. He's obviously very low on oxygen, but he's managed to gain a couple of percent back, allowing him to crash dive down to periscope depth, and I did manage to score a couple of hits while he was submerging, but now, I mean, okay, he's at periscope depth, so I'm aiming below the periscope, but nothing's happening. What the hell? It's entirely possible that I'm being a complete noob here and I should be firing armor piercing, but, well, 150mm high explosive shells exploding that close to the conning tower should be cracking his pressure hull. Don't forget, water doesn't compress. I should be doing some damage, and yet I'm not doing anything. And now he's gone. He should be dead. Caught by a light cruiser at that kind of range, he should be dead. So what was I doing wrong? I have no idea, and that's kind of the problem. Now, what this should also serve to indicate, just in case you thought that it was far too easy as a submarine to take surface ships out, don't forget that what you saw earlier was me torpedoing bots, and those are locked on torpedoes, and I was still able to avoid them. So yes, there is another submarine. I'm caught between two of them, lurking around somewhere in the vicinity of this island. Now the guy that I was just shooting at, yep, there we go, has been forced to surface again. And once again, I mean, I'll put some torpedoes in the water, but he's managed to submerge again. Although he's got so little oxygen that he can't submerge for more than a couple of seconds, but it's enough to avoid my attacks. And it really, really needs to be far more obvious in a surface ship, a cruiser, a battleship, and even a destroyer. If you're not close enough to conduct a depth charge attack, it needs to be far more intuitive as to exactly where you should be aiming your guns when you have a submarine at your mercy like that. So that is definitely something that needs to be looked into. And it's not just me being crap here, by the way. I have spoken to other community contributors and they've pretty much all agreed that, yeah, this is definitely, I mean, why didn't that cause any damage? Where is it that you need to aim in order to hit a submarine when it's at periscope depth? Because you can't count on the destroyers to take care of him for you. The nearest destroyer might not be close enough. You might not have any destroyers left. You might even be in a game where there weren't any destroyers on each team to begin with, although that situation should be fairly rare. At some point, the cruisers and battleships are going to have to kill the submarines. So that definitely needs to be looked at. On the other hand, you could always just leave it to the aircraft carriers. Because while at the moment it is incredibly difficult to score accurate hits on a submarine when it's at periscope depth, For a destroyer who's not using his depth charges, a cruiser or a battleship, it's simplicity itself. For an aircraft carrier, you just witnessed a bunch of dive bombers in a single strike shaving off 3/4 of the health of a submarine who, admittedly, was on the surface and not at periscope depth. And as you can see in chat, for God's sake, I tab out for 2 seconds to check my food, I come back, and I've lost nearly all of my health. I wish I'd realised how effective dive bombers could be against submarines when I had a go in my own aircraft carrier on the test server, but, well, as you're going to see, rocket attack planes get the job done too. Before we get there, however, now's as good a time as any to reinforce the point as to exactly why it's a good idea to turn your anti-aircraft guns off if you're in a destroyer and you don't want any kind of unwanted aerial attention. Now, bear in mind, these are bots, and they're going to shoot at anything that's in range, but I'm taking anti-aircraft fire. Where from? Oh, I didn't even know they were there. And I wouldn't have known they were there if they hadn't opened up at me with their anti-aircraft guns. Sucks to be them. Here endeth the lesson. Anyway, back to the main subject. Aircraft carriers, or more specifically their aircraft, versus submarines, who are about as difficult to spot as destroyers from the air, whether they're on the surface or at periscope depth. However, if they have been spotted anyway, it's incredibly easy to inflict damage on them with aircraft. Oh, there's a submarine at periscope depth. And high explosive rockets seem to get the job done in a way that 150mm or similar calibers of high explosive shells don't seem to get the job done when shooting at targets under exactly the same circumstances. So that's a bit of an issue, particularly if you like to play cruisers and battleships, and for that matter destroyers who aren't close enough to conduct depth charge attacks. And I realise, of course, that this is all work in progress, and that's the whole purpose of running the test server, to identify things that need feedback given on. And that being the case, this would be one of the things that would rank pretty near the top of my list. I mean, on the one hand, it was, I can't really think of the right word for it, depressing, amusing, probably both of those words apply, just how easily I was able to make the life of that submarine player an absolute misery. I never actually killed him, I just chipped away at his health with the high explosive rockets, made his life really difficult, constantly forcing him to submerge in order to avoid my attentions, and therefore burn through his precious oxygen, which reduced his overall effectiveness throughout the entire course of the battle. You know, you don't want to be burning through your oxygen in the first half of the game when you're going to really need it in the second half of the game. But it was incredibly easy for me to do that to him. So you've got two kind of extremes here. You've got the aircraft carrier who, if they want to, are really going to make your life not worth living. And at the other end of the extreme, you've got the cruisers and the battleships who, they might be able to see the submarine, but there's not an awful lot they can do about it unless he is on the surface and not at periscope depth, because when they're at periscope depth, unless you're in an aircraft carrier, it's nigh impossible to score a hit on them. So, and again, you know, I accept that this might just be a case of me being a noob, and yet it's quite telling how easy it is to do the job against a submarine when you are in a carrier, and whether it's simply because you don't realise what it is you're exactly supposed to be doing in a cruiser or a battleship, or where it is you're exactly supposed to be aiming, it's still incredibly difficult to bring effective fire to bear on a submarine at periscope depth if you are in one of those ships. And once again, it's not just me being crap, other people have said the same thing. So consider this constructive feedback. It's far too easy for aircraft carriers, and by degree you could say that's exactly the true for aircraft carriers when it comes to enemy destroyers as well. Generally just kept harassing him, forcing him to submerge and burn through his limited oxygen supplies in the beginning of the game, when he was going to need that oxygen for later on in the game. And it was really easy for me to do it, which lies in stark contrast to just how extremely difficult it is to do it under the exact same circumstances when you've caught them at periscope depth when you're in a battleship and a cruiser. So there really needs to be a happy medium between those two. It shouldn't be quite as easy for aircraft carriers to do it, and it needs to be a lot easier for other surface ships to do it as well. I have no issues whatsoever with the current model whereby submarines are effectively, to all intents and purposes, invulnerable when they're submerged. Unless, of course, they come under depth charge attack from destroyers, in which case I think the amount of damage that destroyers do probably needs to be scaled back a little. Because let's not forget, when a submarine is submerged, it's blind. It can't see anything, it can't scout, it can't spot, and it can't attack. So, yeah, all in all, I think that's a reasonably fair trade-off. But when they're on the surface, actually not so much when they're on the surface, because when they're on the surface, anybody can hit them. They're basically just like any other surface ship. It's just when they're at periscope depth, it's far too easy for aircraft to do damage to them, and far too difficult for anybody else. And that needs to be looked at least in my opinion. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with where things are. I've had a lot of fun playing both as submarines and against them. Not so much in cruisers, it has to be said, for the reasons that I've gone into. But overall, it's been pretty good. I've definitely enjoyed my time on the test server. I'll definitely be playing some more. And hopefully you guys have both enjoyed this video and learned something from it. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say in the comments, he said. With a note of caution. Anyway, that's it for today. I do hope you have enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.